Hello and welcome to this review of The Book That Held Her Heart by Mark Lawrence. It's the book that held her heart, and the her in question is of course Livara, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, who is the main protagonist throughout this trilogy. But this particular book also owns a part of my heart. A tiny bit of pericardium has been ripped away by Mark Lawrence and is invested in this whole trilogy. I don't read as much fantasy as I used to, and I particularly don't read a lot of contemporary fantasy. Most of the fantasy I read tends to be classic. So it's a real treat to find an author like Mark Lawrence who re-images all the wonder and fascination that I used to feel from reading fantasy when I was younger. And of all the Mark Lawrence I've read, the Library series that starts with The Book That Would Not Burn has to be my favourite. In fact, having finished the third one, I've got to say this may well be my favourite fantasy series ever, and we're not including Tolkien in this, but I can't think of any other that I've invested in so much and has had such an impact. So the whole thing about the library is, for anyone who's a reader, this is the library of your dreams. You may have thought that Owlspace and Terry Pratchett was the library of your dreams. You may have found other libraries or cozy stories over the years that were libraries or bookshops that you wanted to live in no matter what. This library in this series is beyond any of those. It is invested with Owlspace elements because it goes on forever and contains anything. But there is a darkness to the library in this particular trilogy that makes it more real. Cozy fantasy is all very well. Fantasy that is happy and ends well for everyone is also okay in its own way. It's a type of writing and I enjoy the reading of it. But there is darkness in the world and there is darkness in people. And Mark Lawrence has got a marvelous way of bringing that darkness out into a fantasy book. Now this trilogy isn't grimdark, a classification that I've got issues with anyway. But one of his other trilogies is, this contains darkness, but the darkness is always integrated, so I don't believe for a second that it could be called that. The Book That Held Her Heart is a worthy ending to this trilogy. As you can see, it's a library book. I will buy it. It's a work in progress. The Book That Wouldn't Burn had been out for long enough when I first encountered this series that I could actually buy it in my preferred reading size that actually fits on my shelves. The second in the trilogy I will buy as soon as it comes out new in this same format, which should be August. I've got it on order. And The Book That Held Her Heart, I'm unfortunately not going to be able to buy, I think, for at least over a year, until it finally comes out in a reasonable format as well. I will purchase it then. I want to own all three, and I want to read them in sequence again, because they're so rich and full of stuff and characters and events and literary references that there's not a chance that I got all of them. I doubt if I even got 10% in some respects. So let's talk about one of those respects. Every single chapter begins with a quote from a book and by an author. But they aren't always real. And I was a fair way into the first one before I finally clued into exactly what they were. These are quotes. Sometimes the author is real, or real-ish, or sometimes it's a play on words. Sometimes the book sounds as if it's one that you've read, but when you look into it, it never quite is. And the quotes, many of them sound very familiar. I believe, and I could be wrong about this, that the only genuine quotes are ones that Mark Lawrence makes from his own books. The Prince of Thorns trilogy is referenced in all of three of these books in this trilogy. And funnily enough, I think it's chapter 50 that Mark Lawrence, at the beginning of the chapter, references this book. That's cute. But there's a lot more to those references than that. And I made a few notes as I was going. These little chapter headings charmed me. A lot of books have them. Typically, I have to admit, I ignore them, or sometimes they're the only part of the book that I enjoy, like, for example, The Shipping News by Annie Proulx, whatever. The only part of that book that was palatable was the knotworks at the beginning of each chapter. But I don't generally love them. I adored them so much in the Library Trilogy that I was waiting for the next one. I read them eagerly. No matter what was occurring, I was never tempted to skip straight into the chapter past them. So, and they keep you guessing, and they keep you thinking. And if you're an omnivorous reader like myself who's read broadly across the different genre and the different authors, there's something for everyone in there. Yeah, I loved it. For example, page 153, chapter 21. There's a book called Grease Paint Smile, written by Benedict Cumberland, which is almost certainly Benedict Cumberbatch, a play on his name. I wouldn't be surprised if Mark Lawrence knew him, because I do know that actor narrates a lot of books very well too. Now, there's no book that I could find on the internet called Grease Paint Smile. Maybe there should be. There is an album called Grease Paint Smile by a Canadian singer I've never heard of. So you can fall down a rabbit hole per chapter with these things. And another library that this is very reminiscent of, I know we're not many people aren't talking about Neil Gaiman anymore, but in the Neil Gaiman Sandman books, there is the library where all the books that authors who died never wrote exist. And I often felt that these little quotes came from the same realm of the imagination that imagined that library. On page 162, chapter 22, there was another one that intrigued me enough to make a notation about it. This one, never mind the quote, but the name of the book is Intermediate Cookery Cajun Style, and allegedly by Gordon Bennett. Again, so many rabbit holes you can fall down. Is that the Gordon Bennett of Red Dwarf? Holly always swears by Gordon Bennett. Is that the one? Mark Lawrence is English. It could be. Or maybe there's that Gordon Ramsay celebrity chef. Maybe it's that. I don't know. So many holes to fall down. Anyhow, what are a couple more? On page 254, chapter 33, I found another one I really liked. Let's see if I can... 54. I had so much fun with this. Life is full of moments where we get to choose the blue pill or the red pill. Only there's no pill and no choice. How dark is that? I love it. Never mind who wrote it. The name of the book was Matrix Multiplication. There's so many pop references, there's literary references. There's one quote that the first part of it is definitely Shakespeare, but the last isn't, and it isn't attributed to him. There's so much. And the book itself is the same. You've got so many cross-references, and this one plays a little bit with deeper concepts in terms of worlds. So one thing I've said about one of the books in the series is the exchange. The exchange is a central concept. In the very first book, Lavara finds her way into this place and she meets a young man called Eva. She thinks it's a young man. You later find out it's a Canath, a completely different species, but they don't know that about each other because the exchange warps people so that you can understand other languages and you see what you want to see. And this effect lasts for a while after you leave the exchange to somewhere else. In this final book, the exchange features more and more heavily until you go behind the level of the exchange into the layer that it represents. This is the book that has the least of the library in it, but the most of the spirit behind the library as well. So, okay, the exchange, I was delighted to locate it in the first book. It is something from the C.S. Lewis Narnia books. In The Magician's Nephew, Polly and Diggory put on a ring and it takes them through into this place that is small round pools and trees and green and nothing else, just extending forever in all directions. And through these pools they visit other worlds. It's a magic idea, but it plays a very small part in the Narnia trilogy. I think that anyone who's read that trilogy a little bit older will be fascinated by the place between worlds. And that is, it must be, the concept behind the exchange in the Library Trilogy. But what an expansion he's done. This isn't just a place where you jump into one or two pools. Over time in this book you learn that the pool you emerge from is your world, and it stretches back in one direction into the past, one direction into the future, but which is which? A danger to encounter. The row of pools next to it is a different world, doing the same thing, back and future. And we knew a bit of that already. You can get lost in between worlds, jumping in pools, never knowing where you are. But staying at the exchange is hazardous because time passes and you don't know how it passes while you're there. In this book we learn that not only there is the now and the future and the past, but there are other dimensions, probably more dimensions than science has described. You can go into maybes, into what ifs. You can get so lost in this Gordian knot of times and spaces and dimensions that there's no retrieval. And this depth of world building or layering is a huge part of the final plot element in this book. So the might have beens and the maybes in this book manage to continue it on from the previous two, but adding so much more dimensions that you never feel any sense of repetition, and you never feel any sense but the fact that the overwhelming possibilities that are before you in this book can't even be measured. And at times you may even feel, I did once or twice, a little bit frustrated that you weren't going in a direction that you could, because you feel that you can go absolutely anywhere in this story. So our protagonists have been separated from each other in all the maybes, and I'm talking mostly about the last third of this book, but I'm not going to spoiler it in any way, in any material way, because I'm not going to tell you the ending. You need to read that for yourself, obviously, but you don't really need to spoiler this to describe this book, which is kind of a magic in itself, really. So you've got all these protagonists we've met in the trilogy. We've got Lyra, who is in love with Eva, what's his surname? I've forgotten its surname. The surname is here at the end somewhere, isn't it? I'm pretty sure it is. Eva Evantari. So they're in love. They're the ones that first encountered themselves and each other in the first book in the exchange and didn't realize they were different species. But Eva had grown up in a blocked off part of the library with 3 brothers and a sister, and now all of them are free. So every single one of those characters, all 5 of them, are off and around and about, having their own story unfold. Lyra has her own as well, and you've got other characters like Ute, the proto-librarian who was once actually something more. You've got all these different characters, and sometimes they may have part of an event on their own, then split up and do things apart. There are so many of them that it should have been confusing. Somehow Mark Lawrence manages to carry them through maybes, glancing off what seems to be the same timeline, and yet you never actually lose track of where you are, and you never lose the sense of wonder. You don't regret the ending of one story when you jump to the next. I'm impressed. I'm just impressed. So this book does it very differently to how other books do it, when you've got lots of separated stories and threads that have to come together at the end. And one of the things that it does quite differently to many other fantasy books with that many threads is that they don't all come together, clash into a finale, and then the book's done. Rather, the finale comes as a whole heap of small smashes coming closer and closer and getting bigger and bigger until the finale actually feels like it has a conclusion to it. And I should probably now say a word about the ending. I suspect no two people will react to that ending the same way. It isn't a happy ending. It isn't exactly an unhappy ending. It felt to me more like the sort of ending that happens in real life, because an ending is never an ending. It's just the ending of one small bit, and more of it continues. And that's how the ending there feels. There's an element of grace to it. There's an element of darkness, as there is throughout these books. These books which aren't afraid of killing off characters, even characters that you love. And sometimes the death can be unexpected, and sometimes it can be non-terminal because of the maybes. You really, genuinely, never really know what's going to happen. And I did like that. There's a lot of books out there these days where you don't ever really doubt how things are going to end. And that is not the case here. I wasn't trying to guess what the ending would be, but I would never have guessed had I been trying. Okay, so what else have I made notes about? Oh, yes. Page 199 had another quote that I really, really loved. For all the geeky reasons that we love books, chapter 26 starts with, "Time is an illusion, lifetimes doubly so." Allegedly written by Boris, who wrote Collapsing the Wave Function, a compendium of maybes, but actually, I'm sure, a tribute to Time is an Illusion, Lunchtime Doubly So, by Douglas Adams in the radio show The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Lifetimes doubly so. Fits this book far more, however. Now, along with all these other good things I've got to say the writing is beautiful. It is frequently evocative, emotional, beautiful. There are many, many characters which you will bond with to a greater or lesser degree, but the writing itself in books of fantasy doesn't always keep pace with how good the story is, and it may not always keep pace with the characters. I'm going to read an example of someone musing inside their head. There's several characters that spend a lot of time musing inside their head. There's a few characters that spend a lot of time hitting people with swords. All of them are good. Was it hate he felt? Arpex didn't think had ever hated before. It felt like sorrow, but with the knives turned in every direction, not merely inwards. He didn't like it. He should, he thought, find a way to leave the soldiers behind, though they constituted the bulk of the survivors. Without the uniforms, only their relative youth would mark them out among the others who escaped the city. So there's a beauty to the writing and the musings that I really enjoyed. There's a character development which is pointed out in people like Arpex, who is the perfect librarian, non-emotional, non-involved, who falls in love with Clovis, who is a Canath, so not the same species as him, and evolves as a character. And that's an integral part of the plot. Can people change? Do they always have to be the same thing? If one person, King Oland, is a bad person, is he always going to be a bad person? And the book addresses all those things in an excellent way that is well worth reading for yourself. Because I was enjoying it so much, and because I'd waited for quite a while to read it, there was a queue in the library, I encountered a small problem. I was loving this book so much, and I wanted to know where it went so badly that I was reading fast. I was gulping instead of sipping. I was missing bits, and I had to keep stopping myself and slowing down and convincing myself that how it will end is not the point, it's the reading experience. So the library is in imminent danger of being destroyed by the book that Liberia wrote over centuries to ever. And that is the overarching story in that book, but in this book, but the way it does it can't be rushed. And I really respect that as well. There's a lot of books out there that I have read too fast, but gulping ahead to the next experience because I wanted to know how they went. I don't think you can do that with this book. Okay. I've raved about this book for a little bit. I'm going to say that once I get the third one, all three of them are going to be read one after the other so that I can pick up more of the little bits that I missed while reading it fast. There is a portion of this book, in the ifs and maybes, we find that Ute, who is the librarian, and one of the Canis, Carol, have fallen into this other world, which, because the library is falling apart, they've fallen into a maybe. It's a different world to theirs and bad things are happening. It turns out that the library has spat them out where it wanted, which is Kristallnacht in Germany, when Nazis burst forth and did a lot of damage to various Jewish communities. Generally a horrible time to be in. And what they do is they emerge at the back of a bookshop, and the person who's tending it is 16-year-old Anne, who is aware of the hatred and the violence outside the shop and how it's seething and what it's doing to her people. She joins, but she's fascinated by Ute and Carol. She doesn't quite realize that they're not people, and she doesn't quite realize that they're not from there. And they carry her along on this search through other bookshops and eventually the small library that the town has. It's an insightful look into our own world, and there isn't a lot of our own world in here. And is it our own world? Maybe it's one pool slightly sideways from our own world, but it feels like ours. And Mark Lawrence uses that experience and those things that are happening there in what I think is a very strong way to build the reality of the things that are happening in worlds that clearly aren't ours and never could be. The world from which they come has 2 moons, and one of them has another species called the genera living on it. That is not our world. So bringing the plot briefly into ours, I think, highlights brutality and its effects in a way that I thought was very strong. Now, somewhere here, at one point during the book, we encounter a character that we haven't seen for a while. Carlotte has jumped into a past of her own timeline. And when in the past the own timeline, you are a ghost. You can't see or be seen or touched. But because the library is breaking, the rules are breaking down as well. And one person has been able to see her there. So she joins in with Lavira's party, which also includes Yolanda, who is Ute's daughter. And in this part, you get yet another nod to the magician's nephew from C.S. Lewis. And there's just too many to mention. If you've read a lot of books, the chances are you're going to find somewhere in here, something in here that you really liked. And now I've found the point in Kristallnacht that I really liked. The library, Anne had come to think, was an imperfect reflection of something divine, a shadow of the impossible. It was shaped by bias, prejudice, and held within its pages every human failing. And yet, in its conception and in its ideals, there ran an echo of some great song that, if it could only be heard, would wrap every listener in its beauty and lift them to some higher, unattainable ground. Beauty in writing, beauty in concepts, and a beauty that couldn't really come out without some darkness in the writing, as is particularly obvious in that particular chapter. I'm going to stop raving about it. It's a great book. I think anyone who likes fantasy should read it. Anyone who likes reading about libraries, this is the series for you. This is written by someone who loves libraries and books, and many of them, and has created a very strong, dark, beautiful universe in which anyone who is committed to books and reading is going to find a place. I'm going to finish with a quote from chapter 23, because it's funny, and that's the thing that a book that is this strong and this dark and this beautiful often doesn't manage to incorporate humor in a big way. But Mark Lawrence's humor is subtle, and it's often irony and sometimes a bit questionable. I mean, caniths share this characteristic with dogs. I won't go there. The chances are you're not going to lack for small things that make you smile in places, but one of my favorites was the introduction to chapter 23. Studies indicate much lower rates of roller coaster riding in countries where people frequently experience mortal fear involuntarily. Compulsory Carnival by Evie Wong. This is a great book. You should read it. But if you don't read fantasy and you can't find Mark Lawrence, find a good book and read good books.